Let's talk about trauma. The reason we include trauma is that it's a word people use every day, it seems. But what are we talking about? Is it possible you or one of your friends have suffered trauma? What are some of the clues we look for? What are some of the ways people respond that don't help? Where should you go if you need help? What will they do there? How can you be a friend to someone who's hurt? We'll cover all these questions in this talk, but what I want you to most learn is how might trauma affect us, and when and where do you go for help? When we learn how trauma may affect us, it can help us to realize when we or one of our friends needs help. It can also help us to have more empathy for ourselves or those other problem students who are always in trouble. Once we can identify that we or someone else is struggling, we can look for help. And knowing what the right kind of help and helper is important. When we talk about trauma in the emergency room, we're talking about a physical wound like a cut, a broken limb, or other damage to the body. In life, we can simplify the definition to say that trauma is an event that may cause an emotional or psychological wound that threatens our ability to cope and changes our view of the world. Of course, you know that coping skills are how you handle the more difficult things in life. Some people are more resilient. They bounce back and don't develop problems after trauma. But trauma often makes it hard to handle pressure and we feel overwhelmed. And when we talk about changes in our view of the world, we may start believing that the world is a dangerous place, or that all people are criminals or mean, or even that life isn't worth living. There's an unlimited number of ways our thinking can change to negative beliefs. Some common traumatic events are losing someone, betrayal, accidents, abuse, bullying, and violence. It can be earth shattering to hear bad news or to find out that a family member or friend, someone we trust, has betrayed us. All these things hurt, and any of them, or many others, can cause us to start doubting our former beliefs about how the world works and how we should think about or manage our lives. So, how do we handle traumatic events? It's important to keep in mind that not everyone responds the same, and not everybody's ability to cope is affected, and not everyone suffers changes in how they see the world. But it's very common for many of us. Some of the ways we often respond when something bad happens is to pretend it never happened, or we slip into a make believe fantasy world. There was a movie called Labyrinth some years ago, and that's how the little girl coped with the trauma of war. She'd enter into her make believe world. Some people want revenge and to make others pay for what happened, and may start fighting with everyone. Unfortunately, a lot of the violence around us may be fueled by persons who have been hurt and are reacting. Or we might internalize the pain and blame ourselves, feeling guilty. We may start becoming involved in risky behaviors or self harm. We may run away physically or just emotionally withdraw from other people who care about us. We may try zoning out and isolating ourselves. But none of these responses is helpful. Each one of them reminds me of one or another of the fight, flight, or fright responses we talked about in our first talk. Can you think of some of the clues about how people act that tell us someone has hurt them or something bad may have happened to them? Here are some of the clues I look for when a person is having bad dreams or nightmares. They may have problems going to sleep or problems staying asleep, waking up startled or unable to go back to sleep, looking or saying they feel sad or anxious, maybe even having panic attacks. Maybe they're expecting the worst, afraid bad things will happen, thinking every phone call is going to announce bad news. They may be perpetrating self harm, cutting, having suicidal thoughts, or even have attempted suicide. Isolating themselves, doesn't want to be with friends, or just zone out from the conversation. They may be mad or angry a lot, with behavior problems, poor attendance, ISS, detention, juvenile court. The grades are slipping, unable to concentrate. They may be jumpy and overreact to loud and unexpected noises. There may be many reasons other than trauma that cause some of these problems. That's why it's very important for a professional to assess what's going on if you or any of your friends are feeling any of these disturbances. You can ask a trusted teacher or school counselor who to go to in your area. Just remember, You should make an appointment with a licensed professional counselor. Don't settle for less. Going to a therapist doesn't mean that you're mentally ill. Many students tell me, I'm not crazy, I shouldn't be here. Getting help from a therapist doesn't just happen because you have a mental illness. Many of the clients that a therapist sees are not mentally ill. In fact, most of the clients I've seen are not. Most of my clients have had something bad happen to them, and they're having trouble putting things into perspective about what happened. They want to learn how to cope with it and how it's affecting their day to day living, and also what it means in their life. It's okay to ask the therapist if they have special training in trauma. They'll ask a lot of questions and complete a thorough assessment, but they should always respect your boundaries and let you pass if there's some area you're not ready to talk about. And finally, they'll collaborate with you to develop a treatment plan. The good thing is there are good evidence based therapies available, and it doesn't usually take too long to start feeling better. When a friend is hurting for whatever reason, sometimes it's difficult to know how to be a friend. Some good tips are just to be patient with them and listen. It really helps to know that someone listens to you about what you're dealing with. Be accepting. Don't try to help fix the problem, but encourage them to get help from professionals. Stay in touch with them. Sometimes when people are hurting, we don't know how to act or what to say, so we avoid them. Remember, we don't have to say or do anything to be a friend to someone who's hurting. We just have to be there. That shows you care. But be sure and respect their boundaries. You don't have to know all the details just because you're their friend. And two, they probably don't need you to tell them how to handle the problem. Again, encourage them to go to a professional. While you're respecting their boundaries, make sure that you don't allow them to violate your boundaries either. That's not going to help them and may harm you. If your friend feels overwhelmed and threatens to harm themselves or someone else, then it's really important for you to intervene and tell a family member, or if they're not available, another trusted adult. You may need to call 911 to get assistance, and be sure to follow your gut feeling and don't allow your friend to dissuade you. Their thinking is affected, and what a great thing it is that you're there to help. It was interesting to hear in one of the professional development conferences which I attended that people who have suffered violence sometimes act out in very aggressive ways and may even become a bully themselves or feel super distressed or overwhelmed by panic or even not feel anything at all. Then again, a person who is hurting is often an easy target for a bully to pick on because they're feeling somewhat vulnerable. Vulnerable means open to attack or damage. As we said in the opening statement, understanding how trauma can affect people also helps us to be more empathetic. I remember seeing a teen on America's Got Talent who received a traumatic brain injury in an accident. He coped by becoming a comedian. But the interesting part of his story is when he said, with tears in his eyes, that he had been a football jock and he realized that before his accident, he would have looked down on someone like himself who had suffered a physical trauma. When we truly understand others, we empathize. We've all heard the saying about walk a mile in my shoes, and then you'll understand why I am who I am and why I do what I do. You can also learn a lot by asking, reading, and observing others. Adults who are our best and sometimes our worst models of how to teach us some of the social skills I believe are most important: friendship, loyalty, empathy, collaboration, teamwork, problem solving, emotional regulation, keeping your emotions stable, and solving conflicts. Our parents teach us their values, and many teachers include these lessons consciously or unconsciously by modeling them, even as they're teaching math, history, and science. Hopefully, this talk will make you think a little bit more logically when you observe other individuals struggling. And before judging them, you may ask, I wonder what they're struggling with in their life. And perhaps you may even ask, I wonder how I might become their friend. These are the main points I'd like to share with you about trauma.